Hello, everyone. Welcome. Good to see you all, or I see some of you. We're just filling up the room. As you can see, we've got people having lunch and they're getting lunch in another room. We'll start in a minute or two once everyone's gathered. But thank you all for being here. 1 or 2 more minutes. Welcome, everyone. It's great to see all of you here in person. And then also we have about 25 people, Adam, online. So it's a full house. Apologies for our friends online as people were getting their lunches. But I think we've got everyone here now. So welcome everyone. My name is Graham Bullock. I'm a professor of political science here at Davidson College and also the faculty director of the Deliberative Citizenship Initiative. I'm here to welcome you to our spring Deliberative Pedagogy panel and lunch. Which is being co-hosted by the E.H. Little Library, the Center for Teaching and Learning, and the Deliberative Citizenship Initiative. And we really appreciate everyone being here to hear from our colleagues, our awesome panel of professors from a wide range of different disciplines. And I'll introduce them in a moment. But first I want to say a few words about the DCI. So the purpose of the DCI is to create opportunities for Davidson students, faculty, staff, and members of our broader community to engage with one another on really kind of difficult and contentious topics facing both our local communities and also our broader society. And we do that through 4 main emphases: deliberation in the classroom. So this is what our kind of focus is today, but also deliberation across campus, in the community, and then also doing deliberation research, figuring out how to do this work better. And specifically, we have programs such as the Deliberative Pedagogy Collaborative, which I'll say a little bit more about later, but all 3 of our panelists are members of earlier cohorts of the collaborative. We also have a fellows program of students who get trained in how to facilitate these kind of conversations, and then they actually facilitate them in the context of our deliberative forums, which we actually have one coming up very soon on April 2nd. I'll say a little more maybe at the end on guns in America. And then also our, we call D teams, or deliberative teams, which are small groups of students and non-students who meet several times over the course of the semester to talk about difficult topics. So right now, actually next week, our second round of meetings are happening on education policy related to grading and standardized testing. And we have partnering with 3 courses in educational studies who are, all the students in those courses are participating in those discussions with community members and alumni and staff and faculty. We also host a guest speaker series and lots of little kind of deliberative moments on campus as well. We just had a deliberating goats event on Tuesday night, deliberating the greatest of all time in movies and sports and on the Davidson campus. And it was a fun evening event. All students and way to introduce sort of deliberative practices in a kind of less formal and lower pressure kind of environment. With that, so I wanted to say a little bit about the collaborative, since that's who we have here today. So the collaborative, this is our we're in our 3rd year, starting our 4th year, and I'm actually happy to announce we're going to be opening up our applications for our 4th year today. And Sarah is going to pass, and Kevin, maybe you could pass around those things in front of you right there. That's our invitation to the Deep Collaborative, and it explains what it's all about. It's an opportunity for faculty to engage with one another, learn about deliberative pedagogy, and then embed deliberation into their courses. And that's what Anthony and Emily and Basile and Rachel have done. And then actually there's several others in the room today. Kira, I see, Dan Lehman was my co-conspirator in organizing this originally, and several others. So Dan Aldridge sitting up right here in the front row. So and it's a really amazing opportunity. I think they'll say more about. And Melissa also is a cohort graduate. And it starts with an orientation workshop where we gather everyone here on campus to learn about deliberative pedagogy. And it's not just Davidson's faculty. We have about 15 or 20 faculty right now online who are in the collaborative right now. And this event is part of the collaborative fellowship experience. And it comes with a stipend, $2,000 stipend for participating, which is made possible by the Arthur Vining Davis Foundations, which I want to especially recognize. We have several representatives from the foundations online with us. And so thank you for your support for this work. I also want to recognize Dean Fuji Lazada, our Senior Associate Dean of the faculty, because Fuji helped support this collaborative when it was just getting off the ground. And actually, you guys probably don't know this, but your stipends came from the CTL with Fuji and Mark, our student support. So on that note, I want to turn to our panelists and introduce them. So we have Anthony Kuchera, professor in physics here at Davidson. We have Basil El-Satari from also here at Davidson, but in chemistry. And then Rachel Pang, professor in religious studies here at Davidson. And then Emily Sidnor on Zoom right here. So all you on Zoom can see her a little better maybe than we can, but we can see you. And Emily is in political science at Southwestern. And she was one of the original members of the DEEP Collaborative. It was actually a collaboration with 5 schools from the Associated Colleges of the South: Southwestern, Spelman, Rollins, Furman, and one more after Davidson. And Davidson, yeah. So, and so really, and she actually has embedded courses, deliberation into 2 of her courses as part of that. So, and so what we talk about is, instead of having them go through and like talk for 5 or 10 minutes, we're going to kind of do like a more interactive kind of lightning rounds where I'll ask some quick questions and then they'll go through each. And we're going to try to sort of disprove the theory that academics can't speak concisely. So we're going to try to limit our answers to about 1 minute or so. The first question may be shorter, a later question in a little more time, because we want to leave space and time for you all to ask questions. Friends online, you're going to be able to ask questions through the Q&A, and our assistant director, Dr. Sarah Kopik over here, she's going to be aggregating, synthesizing your questions, and then I'll get some questions from her. So you can be doing that as you go or towards the end. So, are you guys ready? Are you guys all ready? Yeah. All right. So lightning round. First question. So what class did you embed your more deliberation into? And then maybe we can go sort of straight down.
Sure. So I teach a Writing 101 course that's about the intersections of nuclear science, nuclear technology, and nuclear policy. As mentioned, I am in the physics department. My background is in nuclear physics, but this is a writing class. So while some science topics are covered, there's no background required. I cover all the things that are needed. That's it, right?
That's great. Yeah.
So I used it in my polymer chemistry class. So this is an upper level elective class for chemistry majors. If you're not familiar with polymers, just think of the chemistry of plastics and making plastics. So yeah, that was the class I used it.
And I use it in many classes, but today I'm going to just talk about one, which is Introduction to East Asian Religions, which is my first year Gateway Survey course.
And I also used it in, I'd say like 2.5 courses by the end. So an upper level class on political psychology, which is the main class that I'll talk about today, but also our introductory American politics class and an experiential learning class where students were interning in the Texas legislature.
Fantastic. Thank you. So you can see we have, quite an interdisciplinary group of faculty here, and the deliberation is sort of relevant to all of them. But next question is, why did you choose these particular courses?
So I'll say that most of the physics classes I teach, I don't have as much room for discussion. Where writing 101, we have a lot of discussion. We're talking about a lot of controversial topics. And this was my third time teaching the class last spring. And what I found was like the first two times I taught the course, I wanted there to be really good discussion between the students. And for those of you who teach, you might have experienced this before, where like there's a few students who always want to participate, always want to share their ideas, and there's plenty of students that don't really want to share, which is fine. But I really wanted to find a way to get it where it wasn't just me talking and just a few students always talking. And I found that participation in this allowed for all students to participate. Yeah.
Okay.
I would say, I think initially when I first read the email from Graham asking for participants for the deep, I just was looking at the different projects, I was looking at what people have done before, and I was just really intrigued about, could this be applied to the sciences, have people apply this to STEM? And it just happened that I knew that I was going to be teaching a polymer chemistry elective, and I think just the existence of plastics in itself could be a controversial issue of how we use them, why we use them, and really their benefit to society, even though I am myself a polymer chemist. So I thought this was the perfect opportunity to kind of explore more of that and to try to give STEM majors at Davidson College more of deliberation, discussion, and kind of really getting deeper into some of the STEM topics that they are learning about.
Yeah, Rachel.
Okay, so REL 180 is a first year gateway course. The students who take it usually are taking it as a distribution requirement, so they're not that interested. They just want to get their credit and leave. And I've also had the challenge of students not wanting to engage, there's always a few students who speak and then it's mostly me speaking, and I've had that challenge for years. So I implemented it into this course because I wanted every student to, if they wanted to have a chance to have their input and to hear each other's voices, so.
Come
I had a bunch of reasons, I guess, for selecting the political psychology course, but the primary one for me is that deliberation in political science is a normative theory about how democracy can work, right? And it is also a practice, like the other panelists have described, for how we can have conversations in person-to-person sort of interactions. And so what I wanted, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit to the next question that I know Graham is going to ask, but what I wanted students in this political psychology class to think about is, how do we take this theory of deliberation that people think can help us have better government and better citizen engagement and evaluate it as a realistic empirical practice, right? So given what we know about human psychology, can people actually live up to normative theories about how deliberation works in government? And how can we evaluate that by practicing deliberation in the classroom?
Great. Yeah, and that's a great segue to my next question, which is, how did you embed more deliberation into your course? And what specific deliberative pedagogy approach did you use? And for the faculty in the room, and particularly our faculty who are in our cohort now, this panel today is kind of part of our curriculum for collaborative. So you all can be thinking about how can you possibly use the strategies that our panelists use in your courses? So,
Sure. During the initial training that Graham had talked about, we did a lot of little mini deliberations. And that was my first time really participating in anything like that. And I really enjoyed it. It can feel uncomfortable at first when you're talking about something that is controversial. You know there's people who might strongly disagree with you at first, but the more you do it, I feel like the more comfortable I got with it. And so what I decided to do with the class, being a writing class, we have 4 major writing projects, and for each writing project, I hosted essentially an hour-long deliberation that was focused on that topic. So this is just to remind you what some of them were. My second topic was about development of nuclear weapons. So we had a deliberation about the development of nuclear weapons. The next one was about nuclear energy applications, and then we had one that was more like global politics, like comprehensive test ban treaty and nuclear weapons testing. So the goal was to have students use the deliberation as a way to get the chance to share their thoughts and views on a certain topic, but to also hear other views, other points. And that's something I really stressed in their writing projects, that while I'm asking you to write and argue for something, that you need to acknowledge other viewpoints, and that makes your argument stronger. So that's what I kind of sold it to the students, is like, yes, you might have your thoughts and views, which you're gonna write about, but you need to be aware and address the other sides. And I thought that these deliberations, which really were like one class period, a 15-minute class period, allowed them to do very well. And essentially, writing 101 class here is 12 students. So I think I had 2 simultaneous mini like deliberations going on. It was a group of 6 and another group of 6. And then I would like walk around and listen. And, yeah.
And did you have some of our fellows come?
Yeah, thanks. So some of the student fellows help facilitate. If you get involved in this program, there is like a facilitator training program, which was very valuable. And some of the students were able to come in and like I said, I had 2 groups going on. So I had 2 different students, one in each group, who could facilitate, and I gave them essentially questions to ask. But I could then go around and listen and hear how students would participate.
And one of our fellows was actually in your class.
Yeah, that was awesome. That was great, because at first I wasn't prepared and I facilitated one group while this fellow facilitated the other group.
I think, again, kind of what Anthony said during the training, we learned about different ways of kind of embedding deliberation in the classroom. I think Anthony's approach was kind of doing multiple deliberations throughout the semester. The approach that I took was doing one bigger deliberation towards the end of the semester, so it was over 2 weeks, where we did one big project. The project kind of related to the importance of plastics and kind of outweighing recycling efforts for plastics, what people have been doing to kind of recycle plastics, whether the research into reprocessing and recycling plastics is ethical, if it's actually creating more waste or less waste, and just what a world without plastics would look like, and what socioeconomic effects this would have both locally and globally. So those were kind of the topics that I wanted to talk about. And we did 1 week where we kind of talked about all the different ways that plastics are being recycled. The newest research into that field, and then kind of had them do their own research and kind of had them discuss this topic. If they were tasked to get rid of the plastic problem, how would they start? What would they do based on what we've talked about? With that being said, though, there were times in the class where we did talk about the impacts of certain chemical reactions that we had, the impacts of certain polymers that people made. I think one timely topic during that time was the train derailment in East Palestine in Ohio. So that was actually a precursor that was when the derailment happened for a polymer. So we talked about, and it was actually very timely because we were talking about that exact type of polymerization during that time. So we also talked about, so yes, this is great, we can make these polymers, they're very useful, but what are the starting materials that we're using with? How are these obtained? What are the chemicals that we need? How are they sourced? And all of those different types of things came up during the semester. So kind of just getting the students to kind of think about definitely think about, the important chemistry that's going on, but also thinking about the implications of those chemistries and how those were developed over time.
Fantastic. Thanks. Good job.
Okay, so in my class, we have 4 units. The first is an indigenous religions of East Asia. Second is Confucianism, Taoism, and then Buddhism. So those are the 4 units. I split each unit into a section. So the first part, we learn about the religion. And then the second part, we watch a movie about it. So for Shinto, we watch Spirited Away. And for Buddhism, we watch Kung Fu Panda. The students grew up watching this and they're like, I had no idea it had so many Buddhist themes in it, right? So, so we watch a film and then I have them make a deliberation guide. The deliberation guide, I want them to think critically about the Buddhist or Taoist themes in the movie, vis-a-vis the sources that we read. So we read source texts and so forth. And then I also want them to apply it or make it relevant to their lives, because I think that's where you get student investment in this. And then finally, after the deliberation, they each write an essay. They write an essay that synthesizes all the ideas that they talked about. And so the other element of this assignment I think is relevant to all of you is that it's self-graded. I started experimenting with ungrading. It has been the most wonderful thing. Most wonderful thing. The students enjoy it, I enjoy it. I think the pressure of grades really takes away from learning in my experience at Davidson. And so we have learning outcomes, learning goals. They write a journal after each deliberation, and then there's a meta journal at the very, very end where they evaluate their own progress throughout. I have never had a student suggest an inappropriate grade for themselves. I've had to raise many grades oftentimes because students at Davidson are so perfectionistic, is that a word, perfectionists, and also they're really hard on themselves, right? So they're like giving them these horrible grades, and I'm like, no. So I raised them, and there were some students I think who massaged their grade, like they should have. I would have thought they were a B+, but they gave themselves an A-. So I'm like, that's okay. So I'm like, let it go. But most people are pretty accurate with the grade they deserve. So that was the way I.
So that could be a segue to another session.
Yeah.
And testing that we're doing with our heat team. But Emily.
Sure. So I also took the strategy of having sort of full class deliberations, but they got split up a little bit. So just I guess start at the beginning, right? We read sort of political theory texts on deliberation and what the expectations are for how it works in a sort of ideal world. We read some political psychology on sort of how knowledge and cognition and motivated reasoning and emotions all play a role in both how our brains operate, but also how we engage in political behavior. And then once we'd gotten through a lot of that content, there were two sort of staggered in-class deliberations that the entire class was there for, but there were 22 people in the class. And so to make it a little bit more of a manageable discussion experience, I split them into two groups and they had different roles. So half of the class were participants in the deliberation and half of the class were observers. And participants were expected to read sort of issue guides or deliberation materials in advance, write a statement about where they fell on the issue, and then engage in conversation for the full 75 minutes of the class time. And I acted as the moderator. Observers were expected to come into class having posed a sort of a research question related to deliberation and think about how they'd measure that question, and then attempt to sort of collect data in class about how the deliberation was going. So for example, a lot of students really focused on the idea that good deliberation gives everybody an equal opportunity to speak. And so they counted how many times different people spoke and sort of the dynamics of speaking. Did political science majors talk more than non-majors, things like that. And so they got some practice in sort of empirical research methods alongside practice in sort of skills in deliberating themselves. And so if they participated, they wrote a reflective essay afterwards, sort of thinking about what that process was like for them, how they might sort of try to participate differently, et cetera. And if they were observers, they wrote up their sort of findings about how the deliberation had gone. And I think that worked, reasonably well, given the constraints on, the number of students, needing to have a moderator, et cetera.
Thanks, Emily. Fantastic. So I'm going to take a little interlude to follow up on this question to sort of, you can see quite a range of different approaches, right? So is there any commonality? So, and we accept and promote actually this diversity because every discipline, every course, every area of expertise is different, right? And you are all the experts in how to adapt deliberative pedagogy to your spaces, to the classroom. But we do, and I'm going to ask Kevin and Sarah to send around the next flyer, and we'll share this stuff online as well afterwards via email. This is a document called Pathways to Deliberation in the Classroom, And it outlines, why do we do this, but also there's different ways to do it. We have maybe a kind of pyramid way to think about it. One is like a course at the top, it's just about deliberation, right? So Ike Bailey offers a course called Debate and Deliberation, right? Like that's the focus. Then there's courses, towards the bottom of the pyramid that embed a little bit of deliberation in them, but it's not like a core component. And then the middle of the pyramid is what you all have been doing, and whatever the members of the cohorts have been doing is sort of deliberation involved courses. And as the handout shows, there's 5 components to these courses. So significant time for deliberation. It's I think we say at least 25% of the course is dedicated to deliberation. That there's engagement with the deliberation literature, that they read something about deliberation, and you talk about it. Cultivation of deliberation related skills, a deliberation related reflection opportunity, to think about some metacognition about the process of deliberation. And then that it's embedded as one of your learning outcomes and as a graded aspect of the course. It's something you value, so you put it in your syllabus. And so you can see that, and yet that can be adapted in many different platforms. So going on to my next question, what was the biggest success that you had with your course?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, one of my goals was to make sure that like everyone was participating instead of just a few. And I exactly saw that. I mean, even students who are like more like don't want to speak up as much, I saw them contributing and speaking. And the way I structured my deliberations is like some of the questions I would go around and say, okay, this is one I want everyone to respond to. We'd go around and just like everyone responds, and then there'd be some that's like if you want to contribute, you can. And the students knew this going in. As Grant mentioned, I had like day one of the class, I talked about deliberation. Deliberation was in my syllabus. I said, these are the things we're going to do. You will be, participating. You're someone that like absolutely does not want to talk in front of people. I'm just letting you know, we will be doing these and it is graded and all that. With the 12 students in my class, I was very impressed with like the amount of participation. Like everyone genuinely seemed eager to contribute. And again, same thing, right? There are still going to be some students who are more eager to participate, but I did not come across like a student who was just like shut down, like, didn't want to contribute. And in fact, like the opportunities for reflection that Grant mentioned, that was kind of like the graded part in my class was like, you would do the class long deliberation, they had to write a short, like less than a page essay about, what they learned or what they experienced. And I forget exactly what I was going with that, but essentially like reading those reflections, that's where I was going with it. It was very positive. People seem to really enjoy the activities. And so moving forward, I want to do even more of this. Yeah, awesome.
I would say by far the greatest success was just the ability of the students to kind of debate and deliberate while using very, sophisticated scientific knowledge that we talked about in class and from their previous courses. It was a very, thorough scientific deliberation, and their solutions to a lot of the questions that I asked or the proposed solutions, were just very well thought out, very creative. It was just really interesting. I had never done something like that personally as a student, like being part of, some kind of scientific debate where we're talking about a controversial topic. So seeing that as an instructor and seeing the students really engaged in it and coming up with very creative ideas, getting riled up about some of their suggestions was just very rewarding to me. And as Anthony said, I'm teaching the class again, and I am planning on doing a modified version of that this year.
Great.
Yeah.
Cool.
I have 3, but I'll speak up because I can't narrow that. So the very first is the students took ownership of their education in a way that I had never seen before. I got rid of tests and exams. I'm so sick and tired of the conversation of what do I need to know for the exam? I'm like, well, I have a student right there. So I'm like, no, I don't want to have that conversation, right? But when they made the deliberation guide and they were the ones who were kind of in charge of doing it, they took ownership in a way where I thought it was really meaningful, right? A depth of engagement, it was the best learning I have seen by far. And the second thing is that they developed good listening skills, and not just good listening skills, but good facilitation skills. So there's 4 different roles in the DCI, the weaver, the referee, there's like different roles that they do.
Devil's
So,
advocate.
right, so the students became very self-conscious, self-aware about the different roles they were playing and facilitating, so they became very good at that. And when, think about, I'm a millennial, this generation, they're like always on their phone. I think my generation is too, but like always on their phones. Could you imagine 45 minutes? These 18 to 22-year-olds sitting in a group without like taking out their phone, like that was happening, wonderful. And I mean, I teach mindfulness meditation a little bit, and so I was like, that's great, you know, people are focused and paying attention. And finally, everyone just had fun talking to people that they otherwise wouldn't have. I generally make the groups because otherwise they're just going to be with their, you know, the football team or whatever team it is. I make the groups. I try to have something in common, like there's a couple people from Ohio or a couple are seniors, and like I try to make enough in common, but I try to make it they don't know each other. And so they had a good time meeting people and talking to them, people that wouldn't have met otherwise, basically.
Fantastic. Emily?
One of my biggest goals just for teaching American politics broadly is getting students comfortable talking about politics, right? That a lot of the problems we see in sort of polarization and contemporary American politics comes down to, I think, in many ways, a fear of being honest about what we believe, what our concerns are, and how we express those in sort of civil and rational ways. And so, deliberation is obviously a nice structure in which to practice talking about politics and using those sort of strategies. And so one of the things that I found really wonderful about doing this, both the version that I've described in political psychology, but also when I embedded sort of similar assignments into my introductory American politics class, which obviously has a lot wider range of students who participate in it, is that the number of students who write in either the sort of reflective essays they do at the end of the semester or in their course evaluations, that they felt more comfortable talking about politics, that they appreciated the opportunity to share their opinions, that they had developed opinions about issues that they, didn't really think that they had opinions on. I think all of those are really powerful tools for them as people who are going to be engaged citizens and lifelong learners. And so I was glad that they felt like that piece of it came through.
Very cool, very cool. And having done similar things in my American politics courses, I can, sort of reinforce that outcome as well. I think, and it's great. It's amazing to see. So next question, second to last one. What was the greatest challenge you faced, or the area you'd like to improve upon the most?
I can say in my class, and maybe the deliberations that I chose, I think I maybe too much of maybe not enough diversity in viewpoints. And I don't know if that's students just trying to not, I don't know, to not
Be disagreeable.
Or if it just happens that, the 12 students all had somewhat similar viewpoints. But that happened a few times with my deliberations where I was like, oh, I kind of wish there'd be at least one other person in the group who would have a different viewpoint, so it wasn't just a lot of agreement. And so one way around that, because this is something we do discuss, that can happen, and there are other advantages of assigning roles, where it's just all right, you are going to play this role. And I had kind of, some students like that, and some students just felt, after experiencing the first deliberations we did, where you got to speak your own viewpoints, I think some students just felt they just didn't feel as sincere to speak about a viewpoint that they didn't care about as much. But I kind of explained what the benefits are, to really think of why other people have those views. But so that's something that I think I still want to think about improving, whether it's the questions I'm asking or the topics or the use of assigned roles or not, is something I still want to work on.
Yeah, and there are trade-offs, and these are, trade-offs that we talked about in the collaborative. This is one of the benefits. So you and Basile and Professor Aldridge, you're in the same collaborative together. Dan, as he talked about in his our fall panel, in his history course, he actually has debates and he does assign, right? But there's trade-offs both back and forth, and that's what you can talk about as members of the class. Let's hear it.
I'd say, okay, so I'll give the real answer. I think the biggest obstacle in that specific class was that half of the class, over half the class were graduating seniors, and it also met at 8:15 a.m. I think just getting that excitement was a little bit hard for me. I think from the aspect of what I would change, things that are in my control. I think just giving them a little bit more literature about just deliberation. So I gave them one paper for one of the homeworks to kind of read. But I think kind of embedding more of that in the semester is something that I'm trying to do this semester, just to kind of get them better accustomed to the type of debates and the type of the purpose of the activity a little bit better.
That's great.
So, like Anthony, I also struggled with homogeneity of points of view, and the students complained about that too. And I'm like, what should we do to fix that? And so I put the onus on the facilitators. I said, I challenge you to be devil's advocates. And that was okay because they knew they were playing a role and they wouldn't be taken seriously in the alternate point of view. So that worked a little bit. I've never had students like at this school, like, you know, actively disagree and like debate on a very, very deep level. So yeah, I struggled.
Something we're working on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Emily.
All right, no matter how hard I try, every time I do a Zoom from my home office, a cat needs to be part of the experience. So you all get to have that. But to answer the question, for me, it was sort of about structuring the deliberations themselves and sort of my role as both, right, the professor in the room and the moderator. And my strategy as moderator was really to sit back and let the students fill the space, to not jump in, right? Not necessarily to play devil's advocate, to just really let it go the way that whatever sort of direction it took, unless it got, you know, uncivil or disrespectful in some way, which it didn't. But the students didn't love that approach. I think particularly, right, when thinking about the observational exercise I was asking for and the point I made earlier about their interest in assessing speaking opportunities, they felt like the moderator's role needed to be more heavy-handed in order to facilitate that sort of working effectively. And that's not my sort of strategy as a moderator. And, you know, I can reflect as a teacher on whether or not sort of changing my moderating strategy to meet the needs of the class is important, or if, you know, they need to sort of realize what's going on, right, how the more loose moderation affects. But that's the piece that I'm still thinking about as a teacher and how I might change things the next time I get to offer this class.
Great, thank you, Emily. And I think that, you know, highlights a theme from the collaborative is that there's trade-offs, there's tensions, there's challenges, and a lot of what we talk about is the need for intentionality, right? That just thinking through these questions is valuable, and talking about them with our colleagues. And we might come down differently, right, on how we want to do it, but it's that thoughtfulness and that reflectivity that's so important. So my last question, following that, is how was your experience in the Deep Collaborative? What advice do you have for those currently in the collaborative, those in person and online? And would you recommend it to other faculty members who haven't yet?
Yeah, so I found it very positive experience, and I think part of it is like I don't notice like in other disciplines in the sciences, or at least my background, like my physics education, I think like never discussed topics. It was like a transmission of here are these like concepts and ideas, and you need to learn them and practice them with very little regard to like, you know, like the sales class. Like I think that's so cool to like actually be able to spend time and like talk about like the real implications, the human implications or environmental implications of this. And so I feel like before being part of this, I felt like I had no training on how to actually do this in the classroom, because my experiences as a physics student to a physics faculty member has just been like, these are these concepts and you have to learn them, and it doesn't matter what you think about them. And to actually spend time and learn like how to talk about and how to have discussions was really valuable for me. And again, if depending on your background, maybe you do this all the time, you have tons of experience in training, but I didn't. So I feel like I really came in with a lot to grow, and I think I did grow a lot. And so, yes, if you are, I see people in like the sciences here. If you want to do this in class, I feel like you'll learn a lot. And if you're not in the sciences, I'm sure you'll learn a lot too. But it was very valuable for me.
Yeah, so definitely would recommend it. I think very similar to what Anthony said, I learned a lot. I also was not trained as a scientist to have these types of debates or to lead them. So I think that was extremely beneficial for me and for my development as an academic. I will say, if you are in STEM and you're thinking of doing this, the readings, I don't know, the readings humbled me because I'm very used to scientific reading. And yeah, that is not what we have. So I have to read things multiple times to kind of grasp them, but yeah.
Thanks, yeah. Rachel?
I had a wonderful experience as part of the DEEP cohort. I think I was trying something new for the first time, and it's kind of scary, right? So it's really helpful to have a whole cohort where you can support each other. And also we have so Dan and or do we do Dr. David and Dr. Bullock have done this before, and so we'd ask each, people are really supportive. They give you their rubrics, their syllabi. If you want mine, I can give you mine as well. They're really supportive, and so it was really helpful to have that community. It's so nice to have a community to talk about teaching. It's just lovely. And then the other thing is that I know we're all very practical. So in terms of prep time, it's an investment up front that you have to learn these techniques and do all these readings and do all these things. But overall, once you learn how to implement it, it's less prep time for you. Like when you're preparing for your classes. In your classes, it's also investment up front when you're first teaching the students how to do it, and they're making their guides and you're advising them how to do them, and there's a lot of office hours and stuff. But once they get it, they really take off. And so it's a lot less prep time for you.
I really enjoyed it, and I'm sort of like a naturally collaborative person. I look for lots of opportunities to be collaborative about my teaching and my pedagogy, and so it was really helpful to be able to bounce ideas off of other people and hear about how other faculty have embedded deliberation in different ways, right? I'd always thought about it as sort of the way I ended up executing it, which is this big project that's a key component of the class. And I still remember being in one of our early conversations and having Dan describe the sort of 5-minute deliberative exercises he does in his class and being like, oh, it doesn't have to be this huge big thing. It can be little pieces in a way that I've never thought about before. And so I think that sort of back and forth is really beneficial. I will also say that I don't know, I was, as Graham suggested, part of the first cohort that did this as part of an ACS collaboration. And we were given the opportunity to come to Davidson for the sort of facilitator training and early efforts in August. And that was a really valuable component for me, was to be able to come and meet some of the group in person, and to do that facilitator training in particular, because that was the piece that was the most anxiety inducing for me in terms of putting it into practice in the classroom. That even though I am from a discipline that does a lot more talking about difficult issues, I am not a person who likes to incite conflict. And so I had to really spend a lot of time preparing, I think speaking to Rachel's point, preparing myself to be comfortable in a classroom leading contentious conversations. And this was just one more sort of opportunity to build a toolkit on how to do that.
Great, well, thank you all. And I'm going to open it up for questions from our online and in-person participants. But just to say a little more about the collaborative. So it does start with this workshop, and there is some upfront readings, but it's over the summer, so you have kind of all summer to do these readings, and in preparation for the workshop on campus. It's a day and a half, and people come from all over the country to join our Davidson faculty. And then over the course of the whole year, you meet with each other in a hybrid format, right? So, some people are maybe in person, some people are online, we've done it different ways. And as a cohort, and then you also have a partner or a team of 2 or 3 people that you meet with in between the cohort meetings. And that has been, I think, one of the most rewarding parts of the experience, because you really get to go deeper with your colleague on what you're doing and checking in over the course of the year. Then you submit your syllabus and your course plan in January before your spring course. And then you meet over the course of the spring to talk about how it's going. And then we have events like this each semester as well. And the end, we have a final meeting, and then everyone writes a blog post or does a video blog about their experience. And you can go, we'll send around a link to all the blog posts, including all of yours. That it blew me away the first year, like how thoughtful like Kira and Melissa and all of you are in this process. And it's a continuing process. And what I'd say, like, if you do this a lot in your course, right, you can, like Dan, I think, like he's done this his whole career. But I think, as he said last fall, like even then you can learn stuff, like, and because it's something we're always improving on. And then we encourage you to then go back to your departments and your schools, your institutions, share what you've done, like you're doing now, and to address questions and concerns. And try to, kind of promote a more deliberative culture and more deliberative classrooms. So with that, I want to open it up to questions for the panel, for particular panelists or all of them.
If I could just say, during Q&A, we're going to pass around a sheet, and if you could just sign it, that'll help us know who attended.
Okay,
And there are a couple of questions on Zoom.
okay, well, let's see if anyone submits, and then we'll go to someone else.
Rachel, you could take a drink right now. You talked about the roles that students play in deliberation.
Yes.
And I was thinking, and how that helped them be more self-aware of how they were acting in the deliberation.
Yes.
And I was thinking about how I love to do group work and discussion during class time, and in fact, one of my classes is all discussion. Do you think that group work in general, whether it was deliberative or not, would help students give space for others and work well when discussion is happening, whether or not it was contentious or I guess conflicting?
Definitely, I think group work, but I think the challenge with group work is that it's helpful when there's structure to it, when the students have structure. And I find that the deliberation format, it gives them enough structure that you're more comfortable with people that you don't know, because this is what I'm supposed to do. And there's a deliberative handbook for a facilitator, so they can read through and make themselves more comfortable and more self-aware of they're just much more self-aware. And I think sometimes in group work, students are not self-aware, like some people like hijack the group and take over and stuff. So they're very, very self-aware. And then I also purposely don't have them discuss contentious issues at the beginning. They can lead up to it themselves. I think at the beginning, it's really fun stuff, like, crouching tiger, hidden dragon. It's like really fun, like things that we're going to discuss. And then they can move to more contentious topics if they wish, and some groups do.
Just to sort of piggyback on that, the facilitator's handbook is part of our deliberation facilitator training program, which all our fellows as well as our faculty members of the collaborative participate in. So that's in September. It's 2 weekends in September, and it really enables you to sort of learn those different roles and then teach your students them as well. So and that was something after the first year, a lot of the collaborative members recommended it to be a kind of a part of it. So Rizwan, and then we'll go on.
So what I'm hearing is like there is the question to panelists first, and then I'm sure you'll say something. The deliberation seems to be some theory, some framework, this training, there are structures. So it seems like if I'm doing a course, there's something in addition to it, some sort of a theory, framework, manuals are there that are being drawn. Can we talk about contextualize the intellectual background of the manuals, where they're coming from, which theorists they are coming from, which tradition they are coming from, theological, philosophical, intellectual, ethical, moral. So what's the background? Where is this? Seems like there's a channel, like we take that and bring it and implement it. That's called deliberative. And it's concept deliberative. So anyhow, I wanted to first ask the panelists because, and then I'm sure you have. what's your sense of where this came from, like the deliberative?
I thought there was too much theory at first, because what you made us read these books, I agree with Priscilla. There's all these books about like the genealogy of deliberation and all that stuff, and like maybe you'd be very interested in it. I just want to know how to implement
But
it.
can we contextualize it a little bit, like where did that come from? Who articulated it? Who are the thinkers? Who are the theorists who have put this together, deliberative?
Well, I guess I have something to say. So there is a field, right, of deliberation, like in academic area, it's interdisciplinary. It pulls from a lot from communication studies, from rhetoric. We actually have an expert in the room, Mike Hogan, who founded a center at Penn State, and was here previously as our director of our communication studies program. And so it's a decades-long sort of old field, and maybe thousands of years if you Aristotle and Plato and others. But then it also brings in, sort of, ideas, concepts, frameworks from philosophy. So Dan Lehman, was a co-organizer of it. We have a lot of philosophy in it. Psychology also. So we have a platform that fellows go through, and you all as well, about the sort of like the social psychology of what happens when you're in a space when people are, really tense with one another, and deep disagreement. And then also political science, there's political theory as well. And then we try to bring in, so when we had scientists join, like we brought some literature in, and how do we embed this stuff in science courses, and there's a literature in that, in chemistry, so it's interdisciplinary. It's not every discipline, and I try to be explicit about that, and we encourage faculty members to bring their own disciplines to the conversation. So religious studies, it could be gender studies. Melissa had a lot of great contributions to make from her expertise. So yeah, I want to go to, before we end, because we're almost at time, some questions from our online.
I'll shorten them. There's two related questions. Kim asks specifically for Emily, but perhaps also others, how did you determine who participated and who observed the deliberation? And Andrew asks if you had students participating in a deliberation acting as facilitators for the entire time or for part of the time, and how you handle that.
So I'm just going to restate to make sure I understood the question that was directed at me, which was how do I choose if they're participants or observers, right? That was the.
That's right.
Okay. So I'll be honest, I didn't go back and remind myself of exactly how we did it. My guess, based on how I tend to do these things generally, is that I had them sign, like I do a lot of look at your calendar and plan ahead, and you sign up for one of the 2 days. Or I maybe so that's one possibility, is that I had them pick which day they signed up for in hopes of avoiding, right, I'm an athlete and we have an away game, and so I won't be able to attend on this particular day. Although we did record the class on the 2 deliberation days because it was also still COVID era policies. And so we had to have alternatives for students who missed for COVID and things like that. So either they signed up or I asked them specifically, here are the 2 dates. Do you have a clear conflict in advance on either of these dates? Again, trying to get around sort of the athletics problem. And then I assigned them to try to do some of the same work that the other panelists suggested to sort of diversify groups, make sure there was a mix of majors and non-majors, et cetera.
And the second question?
Andrew's question is about the trade-offs of bringing in external facilitators as opposed to having the students in your own course facilitate.
Yeah, I can comment on that because I did both in mine. I really wanted my students to be able, because the deliberations were kind of advertised as a way to improve their writing project, I wanted them all to be participants, was my hope, so that everyone was kind of taking the same role. So my goal was to always bring in external facilitators, so each student was participating kind of in the same way. As Grant mentioned, I think one of my early ones, I wasn't prepared enough, and thankfully I had one of the student fellows who was trained in facilitating to facilitate. And I asked him ahead of time, are you comfortable doing this? And he was excited to do it, actually. So that worked out. But what I liked about having external facilitators in there was that like all the students who were getting a grade in the class were doing the same thing. So that the graded part, which was their reflective essay afterward, was kind of uniform. And it allowed me then to just go, like I said, I had 2 simultaneous deliberations going on. I could spend a little time in this one and just listen like a fly on the wall. I didn't interfere, I didn't interject. I just wanted to listen to what was going on, like go back and forth. So, but I do know, and I didn't really try this too much. I think there are like educational benefits of being a facilitator, but I didn't really explore that in my class. I just had all the students acting as participants.
Yeah, and there's a hybrid ways to do it. Like in our training, you can have maybe facilitators come in initially to sort of model, like, what facilitation looks like, and then you can have the students then, play that role once they've seen it, so you don't necessarily have to do it for the whole semester. So if you're interested in, having students come and help and just model, just get in touch with us and we can schedule. We've had several classes and programs have students come, our fellows come and help out.
They were really good, by the way. I didn't even know the students, like they showed up and I was like, hi, nice to meet you. And then I emailed ahead of time like the question I wanted to ask and they did great.
Well, we're at time, so I want to, let people go out. Basile had class, but we'll hang out if you have questions. And we'll send around the information. The deadline to submit when we'll start reviewing the applications is April 22nd. So we've got 5-6 weeks to think about it. And really encourage everyone, online, in person, and then also people who might be watching the recording afterwards to consider joining us. It's been an amazing experience. I've learned a lot, and I think it's really empowered a lot of our faculty to participate in this program and to really sort of take discussion deeper. So thank you all, and thank you to our panel. So.